This is a story that happened at the end of the first millennium. The eyewitness and participant was a merchant of all kinds of goods named Hakim from Damascus. Throughout his life, he tried many crafts and found trading to be the most profitable for him. Since childhood, he loved to travel through the desert, especially enjoying observing the vast expanse of the sky and distant and wild deserts where people were rarely seen. Hakim's trade route was from Damascus to Baghdad, where he mainly traded in spices, various fabrics, and utensils. He was well known in both Damascus and Baghdad, and he often delivered letters to recipients for a fee. The merchant was no longer young. He was about 60. But despite his age, Hakim had youthful enthusiasm, mental agility, and energy that young people would envy. Since childhood, Hakim was unusually curious. Unlike other traders who were often fat and sweaty misers, Hakim was slim. His physique clearly indicated that he had spent his life in activity. Hakim's sunken cheeks were covered with a grey beard at some points. He wore a traditional headdress called a kufiya. Hakim traveled with his son Imran, whom he took with him everywhere, trying to convey his knowledge and experience. Imran was 14 years old, and he was one of Hakim's 7 sons. Hakim's small caravan of 4 camels and 2 small carts moved only at night. During the day, the caravan stopped to rest because the scorching sun drained the vitality of the animals and people. Hakim woke up at sunset, left his tent, and looked at the horizon. The desert was silent. The sun was already setting, and the last rays of light were illuminating the sky. Hakim woke up Imran and told him to get everything ready for departure. The young man immediately began to pack up the camp and load the camels. Around dusk, the caravan hit the road. They should have reached Baghdad in about a week, unless something happened on the way. The roads were not the safest of places at that time. Bandits roamed around looking for anything to loot. They frequently attacked peaceful caravans and took everything they could. Hakim had encountered these scoundrels several times before, and he took it easy. What worried him the most were the invisible enemies, lurking in the shadows. The desert was an ancient and mysterious place, filled with all kinds of evil spirits. Since he was young, Hakim had heard stories of demons, genies, and other creatures that roamed such abandoned places and lured travelers into their traps. The caravan moved slowly. Hakim and Imran hardly spoke. The night was incredibly quiet. As the moon shone and the first stars twinkled, Hakim saw something in the distance. Something dark appeared on the horizon. Imran pointed to the same direction where Hakim was looking and asked his father, "What's that in the distance?" Hakim didn't hurry to answer. The black mass, like a thundercloud, rushed across the ground and moved toward them. It took Hakim a while to figure out what was really going on. It was a sandstorm. The traveler saw a sandstorm for the first time during the night and couldn't believe his eyes. The old man quickly looked around for shelter. There was only a small cluster of rocks that could hide them from the storm. Hakim quickly ordered Imran to head toward the rocks while he followed him closely. The wind and sand were getting closer and closer to the small caravan of merchants. They were already a short distance from the rocks when the ropes connecting Hakim's cart to the camels tore. The old man ordered his son not to stop and to drive the camels to safety. One of the 2 camels pulling Hakim's cart ran out and followed Imran. Hakim had no choice but to leave the cart because one camel would not be able to handle it. He cut the rest of the ropes with his dagger and rode the camel toward the rocks. In the meantime, Imran had already reached the shelter. Hakim urged the wretched camel to run faster, but just as he was crossing a small ravine, the storm overtook him. With incredible force, a gust of wind threw the rider and the camel into the ravine. Hakim fell onto a pile of rocks and hit his head hard. Before he lost consciousness, he heard the camels a blood-curdling scream. the poor animal broke its leg and could no longer move. After a while, Hakim woke up. He opened his eyes and saw the midnight sky dotted with stars. The old man was lying in the same ravine, and the camel was sitting beside him. The merchant looked around and noticed that the camel was not hurt. This seemed strange to him, because before he passed out, he heard the animal moan and saw that his thigh was broken. Hakim got up and approached the camel, whose eyes were empty as if he was not alive. The world was so quiet that this silence was somehow frightening. The merchant started shouting and calling for his son Imran, but he was nowhere to be seen. Hakim decided to climb up the rock and look around the area from there. As soon as he took one step, he was on top. He couldn't remember how he climbed the slope. Everything was like a dream. When he reached the top, the old man saw a dozen women in light dresses that emphasized the shapes of their bodies. Hakim was astonished and outraged by this. The merchant heard the whispers. He couldn't make out the words, but these sounds called him to the women. The women stood still like statues. When Hakim approached them, they started dancing wildly. This dance was very provocative and embarrassed Hakim. The old man tried not to look at the tempting scene and kept asking if anyone had seen the boy on the camel. Meanwhile, the women lured him into their dirty dance. Suddenly, Hakim heard a familiar voice behind him. It was Imran calling him. Hakim turned around and saw his son behind at a large table. But Imran was not alone. There was a man in a black robe sitting next to him and whispering something to the boy. Hakim ran up to his son to check if he was injured. Imran was okay, but his eyes, they were just as empty as Hakim's camel's, as if there was no life in them. "Sit at our table," the man in the black robe said. The old man sat down involuntarily. It seemed as if his body was no longer under his control. "Dad, I'm hungry. Can we eat?" Imran asked with the same blank stare. Meanwhile, a crowd of women in revealing clothing started dancing around their table and singing a song in some language unknown to Hakim. "Try the food from my table," the man in the black robe offered. Hakim couldn't remember if there was any food on the table when he approached it, but now it was full of all kinds of fruit, berries, and meat. The old man was astonished and couldn't understand where all of this came from. He decided to eat, but as a Muslim he always praised God for his food before he ate and said the phrase Bismillah, which means in the name of Allah, the most merciful and compassionate. As soon as Hakim said it, all the food on the table turned into piles of dung, and the man in the black robe roared so loudly that it rang in the old man's ears. Then the stranger attacked Hakim and began to tear him apart, while the women who were dancing around the table started laughing hysterically. Meanwhile, the creature that disguised itself as Imran watched this whole spectacle with the same blank stare. Hakim was horrified when he realized that he was trapped by demons, which is something he had feared for so long. The old man tried to recite prayers, but he couldn't say anything. Suddenly, the moonlight night lit up with an incredibly bright light. In despair, Hakim closed his eyes and prepared for imminent death. In an instant, the whole world disappeared, and the real world appeared before Hakim. The old man immediately felt the wound on the back of his head from the fall. The merchant was in the same ravine where the storm threw him, and nearby lay the lifeless body of his camel. Imran ran up to Hakim. It turned out that the young man had been looking for him all night, and only found him in the morning. The old man told his son what he had seen, and Imran listened with genuine curiosity. Many centuries have passed since then, and the story has been passed down through generations.